Welcome back. Nice to have you here. As Kim promised, Kim already delivered my first 2 slides, but as Kim promised, what we're here to talk about today is this new class that we've put in the course. Oh, I should say, the marketing and finance faculty would want you to know that marketing and finance are still in the course. They haven't disappeared in the less than 20 years since Kim went away. But before we get started, because we're going to spend today doing interactions, so you're going to do exercises. So I would like you to introduce yourselves to a small group of 4 or 5 people sitting around you so that you're in groups of 4 or 5. So take a few minutes to find your 4 or 5 people. So does everybody have a group to be a part of? This is always the hardest part of the class, is to form groups of 4 or 5. So that's so you're going to be working with that group for the next hour or so as we go through these materials. Okay? So, as Kim suggested, and I think Rich has described to you, and you've seen in a lot of the documents that have come out of Haas, this is what happens when you ask people to form groups of 4 or 5. We have something we call the Berkeley Innovative Leader Development Program that we started a few years ago in an attempt to really infuse the curriculum at Haas with more of a focus on innovation. And I think you've heard a lot about that. My purpose wasn't to talk about that, but to say that the class that Kim referred to is a class that we have now made a part of the core curriculum. It's just a 1-unit class. It's just a tiny little class. And we call it problem finding, problem solving. We would love any of you in marketing who are really good at coming up with names. We'd love a better name for it. But we sort of did that on purpose because it's an amalgamation of critical thinking, design thinking, systems thinking. It's really helping think about how you think about problems and frame them. So we just used that name because it was kind of a generic expression of exactly what we were trying to do in the class. But again, if there are any great ideas out there, we'd be more than happy to hear from you. And that said, this has sort of become terminology around the Berkeley campus now, and it doesn't really matter apparently what order you put the letters in, right? That I've been, so I recently heard that they've been PSPFing all over the place. So it seems to be taking effect. The objective of the course is we don't have a big project in the course. It's only 15 hours of being together, is to offer up a set of tools and techniques that allow you to think about how you frame problems. The idea is that then you go off and apply those in the experiential learning classes. So international business development, new product development, social sector solutions, all of the clean tech to market, all the classes that have projects in them. The objective is that this stuff gets applied in those classes. So this is sort of just a model and a set of tools and techniques. So why are we doing this at this particular time? What's the answer to this question? Oh, good. I always worry when people sit and they look at me. I'm not really sure what she has in mind, right? So generally the answer to this question is 10, right? What's the answer to this question? Right? An infinite number of potential answers to this question. And arguably, in the problems that most of our graduates are facing today as they go out into the world, they're facing what we call wicked problems, right? Which was a term actually coined by Horst Riddle over in College of Environmental Design in the 1970s. But wicked problems are ones that don't have an answer. They have many different answers. They don't have a stopping point at which you know you've fixed the problem. And you can think about things like climate change, like poverty alleviation, or you can think about, does Apple compete with Google or not, right? So we have, even in the business world, much more complex settings. When I was little and I worked at Hewlett-Packard, we knew who our competitors were, right? You could name them, and they were competitors. Now they're also partners, they're also customers, they're also, right? So it's a very different, more complex world. So part of what we're trying to do is to get current students better prepared to deal with these so-called wicked problems, right? And the other thing we're just trying to do in a simple way is to help reframe problems. So what's this? It's a vacuum cleaner. And it's a robot. Actually, this is, any of you in Silicon Valley play with these as the basis for doing robotics work. This is a big market now. But how is it different than a traditional vacuum cleaner? It's a different use case. You don't have to be there, right? So what are these guys over here focused on when they're doing product development? So they do worry some about ergonomics, but what's their primary focus in these vacuum cleaner companies? Cleaning. It's sucking power, right? It's how much more can we suck up off your floor, right, without taking the carpets and the kids' socks, right? That's, right? So the objective over here, so they've been on this trajectory to increase sucking power and, yeah, make it a little more ergonomic, and right? Meanwhile, these other guys came along and said, but what we get about you, right, is you don't want to do it by yourself, right? I mean, this can have great sucking power, but sits in the closet. This one, not as good. But I bought one because I thought my kids would clean the house if I had one. That worked about twice, you know. They found out that you have to pick up the floor before you run it, so it actually isn't as fun as they thought it would be. But that's right. So the point here is that these guys, iRobot, reframed the problem to be solved. And by reframing the problem, they put a different kind of a product into the marketplace, right? And that's really the objective of what we're trying to do. So in your 4 or 5 person team, I want you to take a couple minutes to figure out how much could you make. Ideally, we'd have all day, and we'd send you out with $5 each, and we'd have you come back in 2 hours and see who made the most amount of money. But you're just going to get to be like typical MBAs and think about it, not execute it. No, not seriously. That was a joke, sorry. So take a few minutes in your 4 to 5 person team and figure out how you would go about making as much money as possible given $5 as starting money and 2 hours. I should add one more thing to it that I forgot. Never mind. Oh. There's only 2 of you? Well, there's a group of 3 here. Oh, that's right. Am I not talking? Oh, it's okay. Am I talking loud enough? Is it loud enough?
When everybody starts talking,
oh, I know. I know. Oh, another minute. Be clever but quick. Do you need a group? Oh, so you don't want to play. All right. How are you? So what'd you come up with? What'd you think of?
Buy a paintbrush and a piece of paper, paint a painting, and
Great idea. There you go. How much do you think you could make in 2 hours? You have to work on that one a little bit, huh? See what you can... Good thinking, though. You've trained her well. That's great. Nice to have you here. Okay. Let's hear some ideas. What have we got? I need a whistle. Do you know how to whistle? So we'll stop. Let's hear what you've got. Let's hear an idea or two. Who's got an idea? Second team that's asked that question. There's a theme here. What are you thinking about?
Well, we had a couple of
all right. So let's stop, please. I'm going to have to figure out, we have a lot of these exercises, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get you all back again from them, or else we won't be able to. So the first question I've been asked by 2 teams is, does it have to be legal? This is Haas out-of-the-box thinking or something like that. So one team was going to buy beer for underage kids. What other ideas do we have here? A lemonade stand. Panhandle in the financial district in San Francisco for 2 hours. Lend the money out and make sure it churns really fast over the.
Well, we decided that we were worth a lot more than the $5, so we focused on what we could deliver. So in my case, I actually had some consulting I could do on retainer, and in 2 hours do much better.
Okay, so nobody said you had to use the $5 or be limited by the $5, right? So reframe away from $5, right, and say, I can do something else with the time. A raffle. Raffle off the $5. Right? But if I raffle it off for less than $5, some people, right? Do you remember that class where you had to figure out, which class is that? I think they do that in Don Moore's class, where you have to figure out, people will bid more than $100 to win $100 at some point because they want so badly to win or something like that. Anyway, I don't remember the...
I actually did this in undergrad, where we started out with a can of peas, and then we went to different houses, and we went to trading up, and I ended up with a TV set in the end.
So we traded up from a can of peas, going house to house, trade up for the next item, and ended up with a television set at the end of that. That's Ken.
We're thinking about selling advertising spot on your PowerPoint.
How much you think that'd go for?
Well, it depends on who wants to be on your PowerPoint.
Yeah. So here's some results of one class that did this. One group said, I'll take the $5 and I'll buy a bicycle pump, and I'll go, this was down at the Stanford campus, and I'll offer to pump up people's bicycle tires. And actually what they found out, interestingly, is that they shouldn't charge for it, that if they just ask for donations, people put more money in the bucket than if they charge for it. But they made $65 when they went out for 2 hours, right? The second group said, the $5 thing isn't really terribly helpful here, right? So that's not the right frame for the problem. We'll offer to wait in line for people at restaurants, right? So that they don't have to wait in line. They can go have a drink somewhere else or go shopping, then come back, right? And they made $250, okay? But the third group said, Ken's on top of this one, the third group said, the winning team is going to present a proposal in front of this entire audience of students when they come back. They sold the spot to Cisco, right? So they said 2 hours, $5, that doesn't matter, right? Now I'm going to break both frames. I'm just going to sell my opportunity to present to somebody who values it more than I do, right? Does that make sense? So that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to reframe problems, which requires, of course, stepping back and saying, what are the assumptions or boundaries that have been put around this problem? Which of those do I have to abide by? Which of them do I not have to abide by? And how does that help me think about the problem in a different way? So Rich, who's not in, is Rich in here? He was in here before, right? That's, so I can say, but I'm being recorded, so it knows. Rich Rich every once in a while sends me these quotes about problem finding, problem solving. This is one of the ones he sent. I actually presented this to a group of Chinese exec ed participants who proceeded to have this debate in Chinese for a really long time. I had no idea. And they were trying to decide whether Confucius actually said this or not. So there you go. But in any case, the notion that a wise leader first asks, if you will, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And this is, I think, the challenge we're setting forth. So here's the process that we ground in, and then I'm going to let you practice some pieces of this process. It's a process that comes out of learning theory. This is not new stuff particularly, but it toggles between doing analysis work and doing synthesis work, and between asking, and between the abstract world and the concrete world. So it toggles between asking why on the left-hand side, asking how on the right-hand side, and between living down in the concrete world. So Steve Blank, who teaches entrepreneurship now, teaches the students to get out of the building, right? And the other thing you hear people often say is that the answers may be on Google, but the questions aren't on Google, right? So I have to get out of the building. I have to get away from the abstract thinking world that we tend to sit in and go live in that concrete world once in a while. So down in concrete space, we do what we call observation work. So that's where I'm literally getting out. I might collect data also. This is one of the things, any Zynga people here, but Zynga was on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal for all the data they're collecting to figure out which fish you buy for Fishville and which barn you buy for Farmville and all that stuff, right? But they don't go figure out why. They're just getting data on the fact that more people buy this fish or that fish, right? So in observation, we're trying to get not just the data, but get out there and actually get a better understanding of what's going on with the why, right? So that's the observation quadrant. Then we have to take all that messy data, and it is messy data, right? I've had all these interviews, I've had all these conversations, I videotape them all, I take all these photos, I bring all that back, and I have to somehow extract insights from that messy data. So part of this is how do you cope with messy data and create order in it, make it into something. That's all on the why side. Before I then jump over and say, let me generate some ideas for solving this problem, right? Now I've framed the problem, what are the ideas I have for solving it, and then how do I embed those ideas in solutions, okay? So MBA students have a propensity to kind of sit in that upper right-hand corner and think a long time about solutions, right? As opposed to just go try them, right? Which is what that lower right-hand corner is about. So that's the cycle we go through, and there are 5 skills that we've come to focus on, and part of this is, after many years of trying to teach this and similar topics in the MBA program, there are 5 skills that sort of stand out as ones that the raw material of the program, if you will, I'll use my operations terms, doesn't come in prepared so easily to do. And so those are empathy, and in particular, the notion of the ability to see the world from multiple different points of view, or literally, as they say, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, right? This is my now almost 13-year-old son, oh my goodness. Kim thinks she's getting old. I get old by looking at my teenage sons and watching how they get taller than me. Anyway, when he was like 8 or something, I was trying to teach him walk a mile in someone else's shoes, like that phrase. And he thought about it for a while, and he goes, but Mom, how would they get their shoes back? So I think he's beyond that literal interpretation now, but we're, so empathy is it's not so fuzzy. It sounds like this fuzzy feel-good thing, but it's really, how do I put myself in my customer's shoes? How do I put myself in my employees' shoes? How do I put myself in my spouse's or my kids' shoes and sort of see the world from their points of view? And so that's a lot of what we work on in the class, and we'll do some exercises around observation in a moment. Then abstracting insights. And I'll often get, oh, well, I found out that the solution should be easy to use. Not very interesting, right? I could have written that down before I went out and talked to all the end users, right? We're looking for deeper insights, more meaningful insights, reframing insights when we do that kind of work. Then we talk about diverging and converging. I'm going to come back to this later, but generating ideas and then selecting options and not doing both at the same time. Storytelling. This is a process of stories in, going out and collecting stories from my customers about their lives, and stories out, telling a new story for the customer. Okay? So we do some work with storytelling, and then finally there's this notion of iteration, right? So those wicked problems, I can't just solve them. I have to put something in place, see what happens, get some feedback, iterate around the loop again. So the notion of learning through experimentation is important here as well. So let's play with the process a little bit. So we'll start in the empathy quadrant. And again, this is the ability to go out into the world and take in information about that world and see, as a friend of mine calls it, figure and ground when he talks about this stuff, right? How do I see what's going on and what the dynamics are? So you'll need a piece of paper for this. Sorry, I should have brought some. Do you have some paper? They gave you paper? Okay. So I'd like you to write a one-paragraph description of this photograph and describe it in such a way that your readers could visualize it without the photograph being in front of them. Okay? Everybody got it? So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to write a paragraph describing this photo such that somebody who doesn't have it in front of them can see what it is. So I'll make it bigger so you can see it. Good. Yeah, there's a notes page on the back of your thing if you're missing paper. iPads work too. iPads work too. Actually, I usually use one of a much younger version of them, and it's really funny because trying to slack off. So another minute to get your descriptions written. Everybody have a good description? Enough of a description? So now what I'd like you to do is read your descriptions to one another. And as you listen, I'd like you to notice in what details your descriptions are similar or different. Okay, so in the 4 or 5, your group of 4 or 5, read your descriptions to one another. Okay. Stop, please. So I want to hear what was the same, what was different. What did you notice about the descriptions?
I think we actually had our descriptions in 2 categories. One was basically...
2 categories of descriptions?
Holistic, kind of top-down.
Holistic, top-down.
And then working our way down into the details. And the other one was very detail-based, kind of working its way up.
Very detailed, working its way up. Other people have that experience? Yeah.
Well, we went from fashion to emotional things.
Fashion. So some people...
Fashion, I looked at tried to gauge their emotions and where they were coming from.
Yeah, so some people are looking at fashion, other people are looking at the emotions of who are these people and where are they coming from. Kyle.
We were super literal with the details, 2 of us.
Yeah.
They look like exactly what they're wearing, and then this guy actually, no details, but just told a story. Like imagine what these guys are doing right there.
So on the one hand, I've got details, and that would include things like, I'm going to have you read your story in a minute, if that's okay. Will you read it? But hold on a second. So you guys, details. Black and white photo?
Yep.
Right? How many people said it was a black and white photo? Look around. Isn't that interesting? Like for me, that's the first thing I would say, but fewer than half of the people, usually like around 25% people say it's a black and white photo, which is really interesting, right? Black and white photo, what they're wearing for men, right? All these kinds of, right? So, well, we'll get there. That doesn't matter. So not everybody knows that. It's okay. Would you read your description?
Yeah. So I said, 4 guys from the mob. They came to collect the money you owe them. two shaved, two with beards. They look very mad, you better pay.
There you go, okay? So this is what you learn from this is just a little tiny exercise, but is we all look at the same exact thing and describe it in very different ways, right? So we talk in class about the difference between facts, inferences, assumptions, right? Some of this stuff is really basic, by the way, but when I asked a group of students a couple years ago where they had learned about critical thinking, like facts, inference, they didn't remember ever seeing it, right? So this isn't an MBA problem. I think there's a bigger problem. We could have a long philosophical conversation about how things are being taught. But sort of the fundamentals of when I interpret a picture like that, right, I can report the so-called facts, black and white, right? Saba, is that how you? Chaba. What was Chaba doing? He was projecting. He was looking at the facts, right? And then inferring from the facts based on assumptions he has about what mob people look like, right? Or about what people do when they're in back alleys or whatever, right? I mean, he's looking at the facts of the photo and he's making inferences from it, right? And we all make different inferences, and it's understanding why we made the inferences that becomes the valuable conversation, right? Because it tells us something about the assumptions being made.
I was going to say, in addition to that, I also thought of it in terms of like the story of the photo, not necessarily just the definition of the photo.
Yeah.
So what I interpreted as, I wrote that it was a black and white photo depicting two sets of drums from the 1970s boy band.
Yeah. Which is a lot closer to reality than the other story we listened to, but that's right. But that's the point, right? What is reality is in effect what we see, right? So it's a mob that's looking to track down its money, or it's a boy band, right? Who is this? This is the Who, actually. So it is indeed a band. So when we do observation work, what we're trying to do, here's the story I like to tell. I was doing some work on customer-focused design with a medical instrumentation company, and partway through a conversation about this process, this guy in the back of the room, long gray hair, raises his hand. He says, I've been an engineer in this company for 18 years, and I visited my first customer last week, right? This is not a surprising story, right? Because most of us don't really want our engineers to talk to the customer, right? And so they're not allowed out to go find out, which is a really bad idea, but that's right? So this guy says, for 18 years, marketing has been writing on the MRD, the market requirements document, the labs are crowded. He says, I didn't get that. I didn't understand what that meant. They had my instrument on a chair, rolling it around because they didn't have any place to store it, right? They had so little bench space that they were storing instruments on chairs, okay? That trip told him a story that the labs are crowded never told him, okay? So part of what we talk about when we're doing this stuff too is when you're bringing the customer back to the company, you don't bring the customer back with words, right? Because if I took each of these three sets of words, I'd have three different descriptions of what I just saw. So this is the Who, and it's a band, it's just a fun photo, right? But I could have put up here a photo of a customer setting. I could have put up a photo of one of those labs and had you describe it, right? And you would have each described something different. Imagine that you're now bringing that back to the product development team, right? And you bring the words, the labs are crowded, you're telling a different story than that person would have interpreted from the photo, right? So we're working on a lot of that kind of stuff when we work on observation. Now, it turns out that there's a series of learning styles from Kolb's experiential learning theory that map into the quadrants of this design process. And in the lower left-hand corner is what we call a diverging learning style. It's just the name Kolb gave it. And it's people who are good at seeing situations from multiple points of view. So it's somebody who, in fact, might have written all three of those, right? If you said, describe this photo, the divergent person might have said, well, if I were a photographer analyzing it, I would have written this down. And if I were just somebody looking at it, I would have written it, right? So multiple different points of view. Any guesses as to what percentage of the MBA classes for the last 2 years have fit in this quadrant? I hear 5, I hear 2, 10, 15. The optimists are over here on this side of the room. It's 1%. Yeah. So what this says for me is that we have a lot of teaching to do about how to, maybe you're not always going to be good at being in that space, but appreciating the need to get into that space. And so we do exercises like send people out, oh, they loved this one. Go to observe people using automated teller machines. And the response was, yeah, just like I expected, old people are slow. Right? Just, I don't know whether I count in the old people, but I'll migrate over to the older corner and see what. And then somebody else on the other side of the room said, you know what? I never knew that you could do anything except get money out of those machines. Okay, slow, more than one transaction. Is there another conclusion you could reach here besides old people are slow, and that is maybe people who do more than one transaction take longer than people who don't, right? So trying to really get people out to say, how do I go out in the world and see something different than what I expected to see? And that's a really hard thing to do. So then we get to insights. And insights require unearthing those assumptions that we've been talking about. And they come from what we use a phrase, seeing the water. Are there any David Foster Wallace fans in the room? So I want to play just the first couple minutes of a graduation speech that David Foster Wallace gave at Kenyon College, where he describes the grounding for why we say see the water.
Anybody feels like perspiring, I'd invite you to go ahead because I'm sure going to. In fact, I'm going to get a hanky right here. Greetings, thanks, and congratulations to Kenyon's graduating class of 2005. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" This is a standard requirement of U.S. commencement speeches, the deployment of didactic little parable-ish stories. The story thing turns out to be one of the better, less bullshitty conventions of the genre. But if you're worried that I plan to present myself here as the wise older fish explaining what water is to you younger fish, please don't be. I am not the wise old fish. The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. Or so I wish to suggest to you on this dry and lovely morning. Of course, the main requirement of speeches like this is that I'm supposed to talk about your liberal arts education's meaning, to try to explain why the degree you're about to receive has actual human value instead of just a material payoff. So let's talk about the single most pervasive cliche in the commencement speech genre, which is that a liberal arts education is not so much about filling you up with knowledge as it is about, quote, teaching you how to think. If you're like me as a student, you've never liked hearing this, and you tend to feel a bit insulted by the claim that you've needed anybody to teach you how to think, since the fact that you even got admitted to a college this good seems like proof that you already know how to think. But I'm going to posit to you that the liberal arts cliche turns out not to be insulting at all, because the really significant education in thinking that we're supposed to get in a place like this isn't really about the capacity to think, but rather about the choice of what to think about. If your total freedom of choice regarding what to think about seems too obvious to waste time discussing, I'd ask you to think about fish and water and to bracket for just a few minutes your skepticism about the value of the totally obvious.
Really, in a sense, what's at the heart of what we're talking about when we're talking about getting to insights, which is the ability to see the totally obvious. So we talk a lot about the water, and how do you see the water that you're swimming in? How do you see the orthodoxies that your industry runs with and determine whether or not you have to continue to live by them, right? How do you see the world that your customers live in and how it's actually different than the presumptions you make in your own organization about how they're living in their world? And so the rest of the speech is online, by the way. It's a lovely speech. You can either read it or listen to it. But it's, he goes on to play out the notion of water in our everyday lives. Things like choosing to get really angry at the person who cuts us off when we're driving in the car, and the choice we have to reframe that and say, maybe that person's on the way to the hospital with somebody who's sick, right? I don't have to think about it as that jerk, because all that does is get me home thinking, there's a lot of jerks in the world, right? So his notion is that there's other ways to frame how we think about things. And so what we do in class is we try to apply that to customers. And it's the fundamental notion, if you ever did Peter Senge's work, the learning organization, this is about mental models and how mental models frame and reframe the things that distort our vision to see things in different ways. So I'd like you to each find a partner. So quickly just find somebody next to you, okay? Who needs a partner? Okay? So, everybody know what thumb wrestling is? All right. So you're going to thumb wrestle with your partner. Winning entails trapping your opponent's thumb as many times as possible. You will have 15 seconds when we say go. On your mark, get set, go. Okay, stop. Stop. So, anybody get 0? Any zeros? Yeah? How about a 5? 0? Anybody get 0? Traps. 30. 30 each. Oh, so some people got 0. Some people got 30 each. How'd that happen?
We decided to let each other win.
They decided to let each other win. Right? Mental models, right? And they shifted the mental model and they said it doesn't have to be about only one person can win. We can both win, right? We can both get high scores. So just a tiny little exercise to get you to think a little bit about the role mental models play really in our everyday lives. So the people who are particularly good at helping to create models, surface models, think about models, have the name assimilators. Assimilators are those people when you're in one of those really two-day meetings where people talk, right? And then somebody stands up at the board and lays out the 2 days and goes, I think this is where we've been. This is kind of what we've done, right? You all know those people. Some of you are those people, right? And if you're not one, you probably go, oh, whoa, that's right, but I wouldn't have gotten there, right? So if you're not an assimilator, right? So assimilators are really good at that, kind of taking messy data and making order out of it, finding interesting things in it. So any guesses as the percentage of these in the MBA class? 80%, 12%. It's a good thing we're not 20%. It's 21%. This is, by the way, a sample of 674 students, so it's a fairly large sample to be taken, okay? So we do things like we work on using business model canvases to visualize systems. The only problem is that we tend to be really neat when we're doing this. And these are messy problems that really demand another kind of approach, probably, than being neat. But we try to give a bunch of different structures, whether systems models, business model canvases, customer journey maps, all kinds of different ways of structuring data that allow us to get insights. And here's a quote out of one of the journals from last year. I think the analogy between synthesizing and scratching a lottery ticket is particularly appropriate. Synthesis involves unearthing connections in a way that isn't always as fluid or graceful as we might like. Throw in other people with conflicting perspectives, and the process can be as grating as it is fertile. And so that's the kind of stuff that the students are reflecting on and trying to learn from that part of the class. So then we move on to generating ideas. And here, we introduced this really basic notion that's been really sticky for the students. The simple, but we don't do it very well. Diverging is generating options, whether it's where should we go to dinner tonight, or what feature should we put in the next product for the customers, or what kind of people should we be hiring, whatever the case might be. That's generating options. Converging is selecting options. The challenge is that you can't actually do both at the same time. But we try to do both at the same time because we judge the ideas before they even get on the table, right? So what we spend time doing is talking about what are the rules. These are the very basic rules of brainstorming, right? Deferring judgment, striving for quantity, seeking wild and unusual ideas, building on ideas of others, being visual, right? All those are basic rules. Who has those on the walls of their conference rooms at work? Good, we've got one, right? So we don't pay very much attention to these outside design firms where they pay a lot of attention to these. Tom Kelly talks about you have to exercise a brainstorming muscle regularly or you don't get very good at these things. Which one of these rules is the hardest? Right? That's the answer I always get, right? And how is judgment expressed? That, very explicit, that's a bad idea, right? That's lack of participation, body language, right? We express judgment even inside our own brains. We're judging, right? So we even just get it out of our own brains. So I want you to practice in your groups. Spend 3 minutes coming up with 25 alternative uses for a paperclip. 3 minutes. Write them down. What's that? Your little group. Oh no, you're a 4-person group. 25? 20? So what did it take to get to, so let me start with, how was diverging? How'd you do? Good? Did well? Was happy, it was fun, and you got to 25?
We got to 18.
18. So a B plus, but that's okay. No. You got 25? 17. So how'd you get to, well, I got a corner over here that got to 25.
Yeah.
How'd we get to 25?
We just had fun.
We just had fun.
Yeah. Well, we've got different experiences.
We have different experiences represented here, so we had different things we could tap into. How'd you guys get to 25?
NBA 97.
NBA 97. A well-trained cohort, I might say. That's so what were some of the techniques you could use to get a bunch of ideas really fast?
Don't judge.
Don't judge. Don't debate, right? Just write them down. By the way, how did you capture them? One person. How's that work? Good. What happens? We do this in companies all the time. What happens when one person is capturing the... They don't participate as much, A. B, they cannot write as fast as you can generate ideas, right? And what else happens? This is the classic, the person's at the board. They didn't get it, right? They didn't write down what I've been saying that, and they aren't writing it down, right? So the literature actually calls that production blocking. It's actually a phenomena. And when you're doing brainstorming, you actually always want to let each person have their own sheet of paper or pad of paper and be writing ideas as fast as they can and putting them into the group, because having one person do it is actually never a good idea. And yet almost all companies persist in thinking they're doing brainstorming and having one person up there with the pen. So converging is now taking this the other direction, right? And here we want to do, to be affirmative. Any of you ever do that improv exercise where you have to do yes and versus yes but, right? This is a yes and, like each idea might have some value in it. How do I use it? How do I connect it to other ideas? Being deliberate against the objectives that you've set forth. Improving ideas. It's not just a question of I'm going to pick one, but it's, well, we could do that and we add a little bit to it, then it's a really fun idea, right? So the idea is to create the best idea, not just select the best idea. And the last one is to consider novelty. So the research shows that even though people are pretty good at generating a pretty wide range of stuff, they're not so good at choosing anything but the average. So I can get people to generate really wild ideas, but they migrate back to the center. So there's ways of considering novelty when you do concept selection. So I'm going to let you have 3 minutes again to select a concept from your list of things to use the paperclip for. And it should be something you think the company that sells paperclips should use to advertise paperclips. And it should not be, you can use paperclips for many different things, right? Because that's not converging. That's just letting all the ideas on the list participate, right? So once you choose an idea and come up with the advertising tagline, 3 minutes. Okay? Stop. All right, now, if this were a small enough class, we would go around the whole room and we would hear all the wonderful ideas, but sadly, this is a very big room. I apologize for the room. This is not the kind of room we would do this kind of work in. You do it in a room with tables you can sit around and lots of Post-it notes and Sharpies and walls and all that kind of stuff. But in any case, let's hear a couple of great advertising taglines. You guys have one? Clip on a dream. You want to fill in just a little bit? You can connect your bikini bottom with a clip. This is the ultimate clip on your dream in my case, but that's a whole. Okay. What do we have up here? Okay. Paperclip art, the best new toy you could ever have. Is that the same as you never dreamed you'd have? Oh, you never dreamed you'd have. Great. So sell them already connected to each other so I could sell them in volume, and I just unroll it, and I've got chains and chains of paper clips that I don't have to. What do you do with your 8-year-old then? You must not have a.
There's really only one use for a paperclip. It's as a fashion accessory, and the paperclip is you. Is our slogan.
So there's only one use for a paperclip, and that is as a fashion accessory. The tagline is, "The paperclip is you." Is that right? All right. That's one more over here. Just let me. Okay. I guess that worked.
So our slogan was "Keep it together."
Keep it together.
And so it could be for multiple different uses, but our first idea was for clothing, so it's, I guess, similar to the bikini. But you could keep your shirt together.
So keep your shirt together, replace the lost button, cufflink.
Or as a pull tab.
As a pull tab for your zipper. That time when you lost the button at your belt and you can't, your pants, right? Okay. One more. You guys have one more. I know everybody wants to share, but it's...
Keep a few with you all the time. It's the universal tool.
Keep a few with you all the time. It's the universal tool, right? So I've had a lot of people repair their iPads on. So I'm sorry, you guys are going to have to share the rest over lunch, if that's all right. You can have but I have just one more exercise I want to do with you before I let you go. So the quadrant that is good at finding practical uses for ideas and theories and solving problems is what we call a converging learner. So these are people who are in abstract space coming up with an answer. Unfortunately, they're not always really so good at diverging. They don't tend to come up with a lot of answers. They have a propensity to come up with an answer. Any guesses as to the percentage of the MBA population? 40, 80. Some of you are not adding terribly well. So 80 might be a little high, given what we already have. I should add that there are some percentage of people that are what we call balanced, so that these don't capture at all. 50%. So when I first saw this data, I was actually quite shocked. It turns out that converging learners do better on standardized tests. And so there's actually a potential. So this is one of the things we're talking about at Haas and trying to figure out is how you take people who tend to kind of come up with one answer and get them to back off of that and first say, what's the problem I'm solving? And then say, what are the alternative sets of answers that I might consider here? Now, it turns out that the little bit of research we've done in my new product development class on this topic, it turns out that teams that have more than one converger statistically significantly underperform teams that have only one converger on team satisfaction and that kind of stuff, which means never have more than one MBA on a team, but no. So my hypothesis about that is actually, and we haven't played this out, but is that the two convergers are coming up with two different solutions, maybe not even for the same problem. And then they're fighting about it. And the rest of the team is sitting there going, I think we should go back to the question. And, right? So this is actually something we're working on a little bit. So we're playing with diverging. How do you diverge and generate dozens of different business model canvases, for example? But the look when I say come up with 10 new business model canvases, and these eyes look up at me like, you're joking, right? It's like, I can't do that. So we have to work really hard sometimes to say, what are 10 different ways to look at this particular situation? And then we also sort of try to embed those quickly in prototypes. This is a wallet exercise we do. But I think it also shows that picking something and charging ahead is fine. You don't have to have the perfect idea. So this is another issue that we have with really being able to diverge, and that is the notion that I have to make each idea perfect as opposed to just putting a bunch of ideas out there and then playing with them. So the last space that we work in, the last skill, is around storytelling. And so I have one last exercise. Now you're going to have a partner again. So you might go back to your thumb wrestling partner. And for a moment, just hold on a moment and let me explain to you what you're going to do. So each of you is going to take a turn for about a minute telling a story to the other person. It does not have to be a real story. It could be based in something, but it doesn't have to be real. So don't worry about telling anything that's true, okay? Totally fabricate the story. The other person is going to be the director of this story or movie. And that person is going to periodically alternate between two words, color and advance. So when the person says color, you have to stop where the story is going and dive deep. Lots of detail about that particular element of the story until the person says advance, and then you can move the plot line of the story forward. Everybody got that? Okay, I would model it, but we're running out of time, and I don't want to make somebody have to tell a story in front of all you on the fly. But everybody got that? Good? All right, so about 1 minute each. Trade sides after you've done 1 minute. Oh, maybe Angus would be...
So you'll be my partner.
Oh, okay. I'm not on. So, tell me a story. Once upon a time. I can't hear myself. Can you turn it off? I'm sorry if you didn't have time to change slides, but tell me about... No, I'm going to stop now because I'm afraid they're going to want to serve you lunch, but can we stop? Sorry for those of you, if you didn't get to do it. This is another thing you can do over lunch. So how was storytelling?
Fun.
Fun? So stories are actually really, there's a book called Made to Stick, if you haven't read it, it talks, right, Chip and Dan Heath. And they talk about this notion of the emotional connection that stories create, right? There's a lot of other stuff they talk about too. But stories are important to getting information from people as well as communicating other information. What happened with the color advance? How'd that work? Right? It's fun because you get to make the person take a deep dive when you want to hear more, but then you don't have to sit there and listen to them go on and on and on. You go, oh, advance. So think about that when you're giving presentations, right? What is the storyline of the presentation that you're trying to give, right? The headlines on the PowerPoint slides are the story. What's on the slides are the color, in effect. Right? There's a great book called Presentation Zen, which talks about slide design and really brings this to life. If you haven't read it, it's a really good book that's helpful in that. But the notion of how do I balance color, which is what makes the story emotionally engaging and sticky, with advance, which makes me think that I'll get to go home for dinner, right? So there's, and you know people who do nothing but advance, and you're like, I missed that. Like, nothing drew me in. And then you know other people who you'd like to say advance in order to move them along, right? So that's just a little bit about storytelling. So the accommodators are people who are really good at learning from hands-on experience. So while the convergers are sitting around the table going, one idea would be to move this bottle of water to the other side of the table, and we could move that bottle, right? So the convergers will talk in abstract space about an idea, and the accommodator will go, oh, yeah, look what happened, right? So the accommodator just says, let's try it. So they're classic sort of profile of an entrepreneur in many ways. They're really good with people, but they're good at getting back out into the concrete world and putting an idea out there. Any guesses? Don't say 80, okay? So turns out that it's about 9%. And this is not, and the balanced people are people whose scores are tied along the other two dimensions so they don't fall in a particular quadrant. So what you notice is, not surprisingly, in an institution of higher education, we have a lot of abstract thinkers. You go to more of the design schools, you'll find a little bit higher proportion of people down in the concrete space. So what we do on iterative learning is, for example, have people take their business model canvases on butcher paper with Post-it notes and show them to the CEOs of the companies. These are, by the way, just recent grads who've started companies. This is not like saying, should we show this to Larry Ellison or something? This is, somebody who graduated 2 years ahead of you. It really completely freaked them out, actually. That I got in a lot of trouble for asking them to do this. But what's fun is that they were engaging the CEOs in a real conversation about, well, what if we open up this kind of channel? Well, that won't work, but we could do this. And so they're playing real time with their business model prototypes. And that's really the point of what we're trying to get at here. So those are the basic skills that we're trying to get across. Hopefully you didn't experience the learning from failure one, but we all have that issue. I test them. Oh, for the learning styles, there's something called, the Hay Group actually offers this for a fee. There's a learning styles inventory that you can take to figure out where you are. Yeah. So those are the five underlying skills that we're trying to teach in the class, and hopefully you got a little experience of each of them, and a little bit of a sense of the connection between that and learning styles, which then sets up the challenge that we have around trying to teach how to do innovation, because we think of that process as an innovation process. And what we're trying to do is get even people who are convergers to be able to step through that process. And that doesn't mean that there aren't still challenges. So this was a journal, My Right Brain Hurts. I can't find my problem. So I will leave it at that. It has been a pleasure having all of you here. Hopefully it was a little bit of fun and a little bit of a sense of what we're doing in the core. We are 10 minutes late for lunch, so I might let you go. If you do have questions or want to chat, I'll invite you to come up and have a chat up here, and the rest of you can go to lunch.